A machine gunner aimed his weapon at the ground 15 feet in front of enemy bunkers, instead of at the bunkers themselves. His commanding officer watched through binoculars and nearly had him arrested on the spot. But in the next 60 minutes, that impossible aiming technique would destroy 6 fortified pillboxes that 50 Marines had died trying to capture over 2 days of brutal combat. At 9:47 on the morning of September 18, 1944, on the island of Peleliu, Private First Class Raymond Hatcher did something that violated every principle in the Marine Corps machine gun manual. He deliberately fired thousands of rounds into bare rock and coral 20 yards short of his targets. His squad leader screamed at him to cease fire. His lieutenant threatened immediate court-martial. Then the first Japanese pillbox exploded from the inside. Enemy soldiers stumbled out, wounded and dying, shot from directions that should have been impossible. The concrete bunker had protected them from direct fire for 48 hours. American flamethrower teams had been annihilated trying to get close enough. Artillery had failed. Airstrikes had failed. Naval bombardment had failed. But Hatcher's bullets, fired into the ground, had somehow killed every defender inside. By 10:45 that morning, 6 more pillboxes would fall using the same method. A defensive line that had held up an entire Marine battalion would collapse, and the Corps would have to decide whether to court-martial the man who broke through it, or admit that sometimes breaking the rules saves lives. The question was simple. How do you shoot an enemy you cannot see, hiding behind 3 feet of reinforced concrete, when every regulation says you must aim directly at your target? Raymond Hatcher had found an answer, and it terrified his superiors almost as much as it devastated the Japanese. Private First Class Raymond Hatcher was 22 years old, from Dalton, Georgia, where he had worked in a carpet mill before the war. He had been operating a Browning M1917 water-cooled machine gun for 7 months in the Pacific Theater. Hatcher was a replacement who joined the 1st Marine Division after Guadalcanal, missing that legendary battle but arriving in time for Cape Gloucester, and now Peleliu. Before the war, Hatcher had spent 3 years working the tufting machines at Crown Cotton Mills. He understood mechanical systems. He understood angles, tension, and how materials behaved under stress. He was quiet, methodical, and he paid attention to details other Marines ignored. Hatcher stood 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighed 148 pounds, and had brown hair that was always too long by Marine Corps standards. He wore glasses with wire frames that never sat quite straight on his nose. His hands were scarred from handling hot machine gun barrels. He chewed tobacco constantly, a habit from Georgia that drove his squad leader crazy. He had been assigned to 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, Dog Company, 2nd Platoon. His assistant gunner was Private Eddie Kaczynski from Milwaukee, who had worked in his father's butcher shop before the Corps. His squad leader was Sergeant Frank Daly from Boston, a Guadalcanal veteran who had seen Hatcher as just another replacement until the battle for Peleliu began. Hatcher had fired his machine gun in combat 14 times before Peleliu. Cape Gloucester had been jungle fighting, brief firefights, ambushes in the rain. He had killed Japanese soldiers. He did not know how many. In jungle combat, you rarely saw results. You fired at muzzle flashes and movement in the vegetation. Sometimes the firing stopped. Sometimes it did not. But Peleliu was different. Peleliu was concrete and coral and death from positions you could not see. The Japanese had learned from previous battles. They had stopped charging American positions in suicidal banzai attacks. They had started building fortifications that could withstand anything the Marines threw at them. And Marines were dying in numbers that shocked even Guadalcanal veterans. Hatcher had been on Peleliu for 3 days when he figured out how to kill an enemy he could not see. He had watched dozens of Marines die trying to assault pillboxes using methods that did not work. He had listened to sergeants and lieutenants ordering the same failed tactics over and over. He had seen flamethrower operators burned alive when Japanese machine guns cut them down before they could get close enough to use their weapons. On the 3rd night, sitting in a shell crater with Kaczynski, Hatcher had a realization about angles and ricochets that would either save lives or get him court-martialed. He decided he did not care which. The 1st Marine Division hit Peleliu on September 15, 1944. Intelligence had predicted the island would fall in 4 days. The Marines would still be fighting there in November. The Japanese had built a defensive system unlike anything American forces had encountered. Over 500 fortified positions connected by tunnels, reinforced concrete pillboxes with interlocking fields of fire, positions built into coral ridges with clear views of every approach, machine gun nests protected by 3 feet of concrete and coral aggregate that could stop 50 caliber bullets. And every position was invisible until you were already in its killing zone. Hatcher had watched the pattern repeat for 3 days. Marines would advance across open ground toward what looked like empty ridgeline. Then machine guns would open fire from positions nobody had spotted. Men would fall. Survivors would hit the deck. Flanking fire would come from different positions. More men would die. The advance would stop. Then came the problem of actually destroying the pillboxes. Direct fire did not work. The concrete was too thick. Armor-piercing rounds from tanks barely scratched it. High explosive shells made noise but did not penetrate. The Japanese had engineered these positions specifically to survive American firepower. Flamethrowers could work if you got close enough, but getting close enough meant crossing 50 to 100 yards of open ground under direct machine gun fire. Hatcher had watched 7 flamethrower teams try on the 2nd day alone. All 7 were destroyed before reaching their targets. 14 Marines dead. Nothing accomplished. Artillery could sometimes collapse a position with repeated direct hits, but forward observers could rarely pinpoint the exact location of pillboxes that were deliberately camouflaged and built into terrain features. Rounds would land close, but not close enough. The Japanese inside would wait out the bombardment, then resume firing as soon as Marines tried to advance. Airstrikes faced the same problem. Pilots could see the general area, but not specific pillboxes. Bombs would obliterate sections of ridge, but miss the actual fortifications by 20 or 30 yards. Close enough to terrify the Japanese inside, but not close enough to kill them. Naval gunfire had the same limitations. The battleship Pennsylvania had fired over 700 rounds at Peleliu's ridges on the 1st day. The bombardment was spectacular. The noise was deafening. The results were minimal. Japanese positions survived because they were too small and too well concealed for ships to target effectively. By September 18th, Dog Company had been trying to advance past one specific cluster of pillboxes for 2 full days. The positions controlled a narrow valley between 2 coral ridges. Any unit that wanted to advance further had to pass through that valley, and the Japanese defenders made passage impossible. Hatcher knew the names of some of the Marines who had died trying. Corporal James Mitchell from Tennessee had been killed on the 16th, leading a rifle squad toward the closest pillbox. Machine gun fire from multiple positions cut down his entire squad in seconds. 8 men dead. Mitchell had been in the Corps for 4 years. He had survived Guadalcanal. He died 50 yards short of his objective on Peleliu. Private First Class Anthony Romano from New Jersey had been part of a flamethrower team on the 17th. He had made it within 30 yards of a pillbox entrance before Japanese fire hit his fuel tanks. Romano burned alive in front of his squad. Hatcher had heard the screaming. Everyone had heard the screaming. Lance Corporal David Chen from California had been a runner carrying messages between company command and forward positions. He was not even supposed to be in combat. Japanese fire from a concealed position caught him crossing open ground. Chen was 19 years old. He had been in theater for 6 weeks. Sergeant Thomas O'Brien from New York had led a demolition team on the morning of the 18th. His job was to get close enough to throw satchel charges into pillbox firing ports. O'Brien made it within 20 yards. Machine gun fire killed him and 2 other Marines. The satchel charges exploded harmlessly in the open. Hatcher had not known any of these men well. The division was too large. Replacements came and went, but he had seen them around, had nodded to Mitchell at Chow, had bummed a cigarette from Romano, had helped Chen find his company command post one evening. Now they were dead, and more Marines would die using the same tactics that had already failed. By the morning of September 18th, Dog Company had lost 37 men killed and wounded trying to advance past those pillboxes. The 1st Marine Division as a whole had taken over 1,500 casualties in 3 days. Casualty rates exceeded even Tarawa, which had been the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history up to that point. The tactical problem was simple but unsolvable using standard doctrine. You could not see the enemy. You could not suppress the enemy. You could not destroy the enemy's fortifications. You could not advance without taking murderous casualties. And you could not bypass the positions because the entire island was covered with similar defenses. Hatcher had spent 3 days watching men die trying to solve this problem using approved methods. Machine gun doctrine said, aim at your target. If you cannot see your target, fire at the most likely position. Use grazing fire to suppress enemy movement. Use plunging fire for targets behind cover. Maintain your fields of fire. Support advancing infantry. All of this assumed you could see the enemy, or at least see where the enemy was likely to be. None of it addressed the reality of Peleliu. Concrete pillboxes built into coral ridges with firing ports barely 12 inches wide. Positions invisible until they opened fire. Multiple interlocking positions supporting each other. The machine gun manual had no answer for this. Neither did the tactical manuals. Neither did the officers who kept ordering the same attacks that kept failing. On the night of September 17th, Hatcher sat in a shell crater with Kozinski, cleaning their machine gun. The weapon was filthy from 3 days of firing. Coral dust got into everything. The barrel needed changing. The water jacket had a slow leak. Kozinski had his shirt off, trying to cool down in the tropical heat. Hatcher chewed tobacco and thought about angles. He thought about how bullets behaved when they hit hard surfaces. He thought about ricochets. He thought about geometry and trajectory. He thought about the carpet mill back in Georgia and how you could sometimes bounce materials off surfaces to reach places you could not reach directly. And he thought about something he had seen 2 days earlier that had stuck in his mind. The realization came from watching what happened when bullets missed. On September 16th, Hatcher had been firing at a Japanese position 600 yards away. He could not see the actual pillbox. He could only see muzzle flashes from their machine gun. Standard suppressive fire. Aim at the flashes. Keep their heads down. Support the rifle squads trying to advance. Except the rifle squads could not advance because the Japanese machine gun never stopped firing. Hatcher's bullets were hitting coral somewhere around the position, but not suppressing anything. Then he adjusted his aim lower, fired into the ground about 20 yards in front of the position. The coral there was bare rock, tilted at an angle. His tracers hit the coral and bounced upward and backward, ricocheted at crazy angles into the air. For just a moment, the Japanese machine gun stopped firing. Hatcher thought he had imagined it. He kept firing. More ricochets, more crazy angles. The Japanese machine gun resumed, but slower, more cautious. Something had changed. That moment stayed with Hatcher through the rest of the day. That night, sitting with Kozinski, he started thinking it through systematically. Coral was hard, harder than rock. Bullets hitting coral at shallow angles would ricochet. Basic physics. Hatcher did not know the equations, but he understood the principle. A bullet hits a hard surface at a shallow angle. It bounces. Change the angle of impact, change the angle of ricochet. The coral ridges on Peleliu were not vertical. They tilted, sloped. Layers of coral at different angles. If you hit the right spot at the right angle, a bullet would bounce upward. Maybe bounce into positions you could not see directly. Japanese pillboxes were built into these ridges. Concrete boxes with firing ports facing outward toward American positions. The ports were narrow, small targets, hard to hit. Even if you could see them, you would need perfect accuracy at long range. But the pillboxes had to be open somewhere, had to have entrances, had to have ventilation. The Japanese inside had to breathe, had to move around, had to receive ammunition and supplies. Those openings faced backward, away from American positions, protected by the ridge itself. You could not see them from the front, could not shoot at them directly, which is why they were safe. Unless you bounced bullets off the coral in front of the position at angles that sent rounds up and backward into spaces that were supposed to be protected. Hatcher turned this over in his mind, pictured the geometry, pictured bullet trajectories hitting coral at maybe 15 or 20 degrees, bouncing upward at 40 or 50 degrees, arcing backward into space behind the pillbox's firing port. It would take hundreds of rounds, maybe thousands. You would be firing blind. You would not know if it was working until Japanese soldiers stopped shooting or started dying. You would be wasting ammunition on a technique that might not work at all. And it violated every principle in the machine gun manual. The manual said, aim at your target. Do not waste ammunition. Fire controlled bursts. Observe your impacts. Adjust your fire based on results. This technique required aiming at the ground, firing long, continuous bursts, accepting that you could not see your impacts or results, trusting physics and geometry instead of observation. Any officer watching would think you had lost your mind. Any squad leader would shut you down immediately. Any ammunition officer would want you court-martialed for wasting precious bullets. But Hatcher kept thinking about those 37 Marines from Dog Company alone, kept thinking about Mitchell and Romano and Chen and O'Brien, kept thinking about how many more would die if someone did not figure out a way to break through these defenses. He turned to Kaczynski, asked him a question. If you wanted to shoot someone hiding behind a wall and you could not go around the wall or through the wall, how would you do it? Kaczynski looked at him like he was crazy. You would not. You would call for artillery or air support, or wait for someone with explosives. Hatcher shook his head. What if artillery did not work? What if air support did not work? What if explosives could not get close enough? What if the only weapon you had was a machine gun and a lot of ammunition? Kaczynski thought about it. Said you would be out of luck. Machine guns fire in straight lines. Walls block straight lines. Simple geometry. Hatcher asked, what if the bullets did not travel in straight lines? What if they bounced? Kaczynski stared at him, then said ricochets were random, unpredictable, dangerous. You did not aim for ricochets. That was basic weapons safety. Hatcher agreed ricochets were dangerous. That was the point. Make them dangerous for the Japanese. Fire enough rounds at the right angle, some would bounce into spaces the Japanese thought were protected. Kaczynski said it would never work. He would waste thousands of rounds. The lieutenant would stop you after the first burst. You would get court-martialed. Hatcher said probably. But 37 Marines were already dead. More would die tomorrow. And he would rather get court-martialed than watch more men die because nobody tried something different. Kaczynski was quiet for a long time. Then he said if Hatcher was serious about this, he would need to figure out the exact angle, would need to know where to aim, would need to do it fast once he started because officers would shut him down within seconds. Hatcher said he had been thinking about that. The coral in front of the pillbox positions sloped at maybe 20 degrees. If he hit it at a shallow angle, rounds would bounce upward at 40 or 50 degrees. That should carry them up and backward, right into the space behind the firing ports. He would aim at a spot about 15 to 20 feet in front of the pillbox. Fire in long bursts, thousands of rounds. Just keep shooting until something happened. Kaczynski asked, what if nothing happened? What if the physics did not work the way Hatcher thought? Hatcher shrugged. Then he would get court-martialed for nothing, but at least he would have tried. They sat in silence for a while, listened to distant gunfire, smelled coral dust and gunpowder and death, thought about the next day and what might happen. Finally, Kaczynski said he would support the decision, would feed ammunition, would not stop Hatcher once he started, but Kaczynski wanted it on record that he thought this was completely insane. Hatcher said that was fair. It probably was insane, but nothing else was working. Hatcher did not tell Sergeant Daly about his plan, did not tell Lieutenant Morrison, did not tell anyone except Kaczynski. He knew they would refuse permission, knew they would order him to follow standard doctrine, knew this had to be done without authorization, or it would not be done at all. The machine gun doctrine was clear. Chapter 4, Section 2 of the Browning Machine Gun Manual, 1941 edition. Direct fire at observed targets. Indirect fire only under direction of forward observers using proper triangulation methods. Grazing fire to deny terrain to enemy movement. Plunging fire for targets in defilade using calculated elevation adjustments. Nothing about deliberate ricochet fire. Nothing about firing into the ground in front of enemy positions. Nothing about bouncing bullets off coral at calculated angles. The manual also covered ammunition expenditure. Machine guns were support weapons. They provided sustained fire during critical moments. They suppressed enemy positions while riflemen maneuvered. But they did not fire continuously for extended periods unless specifically ordered. Ammunition was precious. Supply lines were fragile. Wasting ammunition was a court-martial offense. What Hatcher was planning would consume thousands of rounds in minutes, would appear to any observer as completely wasteful random firing, would violate doctrine, orders, and common sense. The punishment for unauthorized modification of tactics during combat was severe. Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Failure to obey order or regulation. Maximum penalty. Dishonorable discharge. Forfeiture of all pay. 2 years confinement. The punishment for deliberately wasting government property during wartime was worse. Article 108. Damage, destruction, or wrongful disposition of military property. During wartime, 5 years confinement. Hatcher knew the risks. Knew he could spend years in military prison if this went wrong. Knew his military record would be destroyed. Knew he might never see Georgia again. But he also knew Marines would die tomorrow, using tactics that did not work, and he could not watch that happen without trying something different. On the morning of September 18th, Dog Company prepared for another attack on the Pillbox line. Same objective, same approach, same tactics that had failed for 2 days. Lieutenant Morrison gave the order at 0830. Rifle squads would advance in bounds, using whatever cover they could find. Machine guns would provide suppressive fire. Hatcher and Kaczynski set up their position in a shell crater 70 yards from the nearest Japanese pillbox. The crater was about 5 feet deep, with good protection from direct fire. Hatcher could see the ridge where the pillboxes were located, but could not see the actual positions. He could see coral outcroppings, could see bare rock, could see the slope in front of the ridge. The Browning M1917 was ready. Clean barrel, full water jacket, ammunition belts laid out properly. Kaczynski had prepared 10 belts, 250 rounds each. 2,500 rounds total, enough for about 6 minutes of sustained fire if Hatcher fired the way he planned. Sergeant Daly was positioned 30 yards to their left with a rifle squad. Lieutenant Morrison was further back with the company command post. Neither could see Hatcher's exact position or firing angles from where they were. At 0845, Morrison ordered machine guns to commence suppressive fire. Hatcher settled behind the gun, wrapped his hands around the grips, pressed his shoulder against the stock, looked down the barrel at the ridge. Then he deliberately lowered his aim, pointed the barrel at the ground 15 feet in front of the pillbox he could not see. Adjusted elevation to ensure rounds would hit coral at a shallow angle. Checked his sight picture. Told Kaczynski to get ready. Kaczynski fed the first belt into the weapon, slapped Hatcher on the helmet to signal ready. Hatcher pressed the trigger. The Browning roared. 30 caliber rounds cycled through the weapon at 500 rounds per minute. The gun shook. The tripod dug into coral. Spent brass ejected onto the ground. The water jacket started heating up. Hatcher watched his tracers hit coral exactly where he aimed. Watched them bounce. Watched them arc upward and backward at crazy angles. Watched them disappear into space behind the ridgeline. He kept firing, kept the trigger pressed, ignored doctrine, ignored training, ignored everything except maintaining his aim point. Kaczynski fed the second belt. The first belt emptied in 30 seconds. 250 rounds downrange. All of them hitting coral, bouncing, arcing away. None of them hitting the pillbox directly. From 30 yards away, Sergeant Daly started yelling. Hatcher could hear him over the machine gun, could hear him screaming to cease fire, could hear him demanding to know what Hatcher was doing firing into the ground. Hatcher ignored him, kept firing. Third belt. 400 rounds now. 500. The barrel was heating up. The water in the jacket was boiling. Lieutenant Morrison was yelling on the radio. Hatcher could hear Kaczynski's radio crackling. Someone was demanding that Hatcher cease fire immediately. Someone was threatening arrest. Hatcher kept firing. Sixth belt. Seventh belt. 1,500 rounds. The coral in front of the pillbox was chewed up now, pockmarked with impacts. But the ricochets kept bouncing, kept arcing upward. Then something changed. The Japanese machine gun that had been firing from that pillbox went silent, just stopped. No more muzzle flashes, no more incoming fire. Hatcher kept firing. Eighth belt, ninth belt, 2,200 rounds now. Smoke started coming from behind the pillbox. Not much, just wisps, but definitely smoke. Daly was still yelling. Morrison was screaming on the radio. Someone was running toward Hatcher's position, probably to physically stop him. Hatcher fired the 10th belt, 2,500 rounds total, then released the trigger, let the barrel cool, looked at the pillbox through binoculars. Japanese soldiers were stumbling out of the position. 3 of them, all wounded, all bleeding. One collapsed immediately. The other 2 tried to run and were shot by Marine riflemen. The pillbox that had survived 2 days of attacks was silent, dead, destroyed by a technique that should not have worked. Daly reached Hatcher's position, started screaming, demanded to know what Hatcher thought he was doing, told him he was under arrest, told him Lieutenant Morrison was going to have him court-martialed. Hatcher pointed at the pillbox, pointed at the dead Japanese soldiers, said it worked. Daly looked at the pillbox, looked at Hatcher, looked at the coral chewed up by impacts, started to say something, stopped, looked at the pillbox again. Then more Japanese positions opened fire, other pillboxes further up the ridge. But Hatcher had proved something. You could kill an enemy you could not see. You could defeat concrete and coral with nothing but geometry and bullets. Hatcher looked at Daly, asked if he was still under arrest. Daly was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do it again. Do it to the next pillbox. If it works twice, Morrison will have to listen." Hatcher nodded, told Kaczynski to bring more ammunition. At 9:53, Hatcher aimed at the second pillbox. This one was 80 yards away, built into the ridge at a slightly different angle. He could not see the position itself, could only see muzzle flashes when it fired. He had 20 more ammunition belts, 5,000 rounds. Kaczynski had carried them forward during the confusion after the first pillbox fell. Other Marines had helped without being told. Word was spreading. Something impossible had just happened. Marines wanted to see if it would happen again. Hatcher adjusted his aim point. This pillbox was higher up the ridge. The coral slope in front of it was steeper. He would need to hit it at a different angle to get the same ricochet effect. He estimated the spot. About 20 feet in front of the position. Maybe slightly to the left to account for the slope. No time for careful calculation. No time for testing. Just estimate and fire. He pressed the trigger at 9:54. The Browning hammered. Rounds tore into coral, ricocheted upward, arced backward. This time Hatcher could actually see some of the ricochets, could see tracers bouncing at wild angles, could see them disappear into space behind the pillbox. First belt gone, second belt, third belt, 750 rounds. The Japanese machine gun kept firing. Hatcher started wondering if the angle was wrong, if the physics did not work the same way on this position, if he was wasting ammunition on nothing. Fourth belt, fifth belt, 1,250 rounds. The Japanese gun faltered, fired in shorter bursts, longer pauses between bursts. Sixth belt, seventh belt, 1,750 rounds. The Japanese gun went silent. Hatcher kept firing. 3 more belts, 2,500 rounds total into the second position. Then he stopped, waited, watched. Smoke came from behind the ridgeline. Then Japanese soldiers emerged, 4 of them this time, all wounded, all trying to escape the position. Marine rifle fire cut them down. Sergeant Daly was standing next to Hatcher now, not yelling anymore, just watching, processing what he was seeing. Lieutenant Morrison came up. Young officer, 23 years old, Naval Academy graduate, had been in combat for 6 days total. He had watched the second pillbox fall, had watched it through binoculars, had seen Japanese soldiers emerge wounded and dying. Morrison looked at Hatcher, asked what exactly Hatcher was doing. Hatcher explained. The coral slopes, the ricochet angles, the geometry, firing into the ground instead of at the target, bouncing rounds into spaces the Japanese thought were protected. Morrison listened, said it was completely contrary to doctrine, said it appeared to be working, said he should arrest Hatcher but needed to think about it, said in the meantime keep firing at any pillbox Hatcher could reach using this method. By 10:15, Hatcher had destroyed a third pillbox. Same technique, same result. 2,300 rounds. Dead Japanese defenders. By 10:32, a fourth pillbox. This one took longer, 3,000 rounds. The angle was difficult, but it worked. By 10:40, a fifth pillbox. 1,800 rounds. Faster now. Hatcher was getting better at estimating the angles. By 10:51, a sixth pillbox. 2,000 rounds. The defensive line that had held up Dog Company for 2 days was collapsing. Rifle squads were advancing now, actually advancing, moving through the valley between the ridges without taking murderous fire. The pillboxes were silent. The Japanese defensive line was broken. Hatcher had fired approximately 15,300 rounds in 62 minutes. He had destroyed 6 fortified positions, using a technique that did not officially exist. He had done it alone except for Kaczynski feeding ammunition. The barrel of the Browning was destroyed, burned out from sustained firing. The water jacket was empty, boiled dry. The weapon would need complete rebuilding before it could fire again. But 6 pillboxes were eliminated. The advance could continue. Marines who would have died trying to assault those positions were alive. At 11:15, Lieutenant Morrison told Hatcher to stand down, told him to report to company command, told Kaczynski to come too. Hatcher thought he was being arrested, thought Morrison had decided court-martial was the right response after all. He walked back to the command post with Kaczynski, both of them filthy with coral dust and gun smoke, both of them exhausted. Morrison was there. So was Captain Hayes, the company commander. So was Major Caldwell from battalion headquarters. 3 officers, all staring at Hatcher. Hayes asked Morrison to explain what had happened. Morrison did, explained the technique, explained the results, explained that it violated doctrine, but achieved objectives that standard methods could not achieve. Major Caldwell looked at Hatcher, asked if Hatcher understood he had violated regulations, asked if Hatcher understood the potential consequences. Hatcher said, "Yes, sir," said he understood, said he did it anyway because Marines were dying and nothing else was working. Caldwell was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked if Hatcher could teach this technique to other machine gunners. could explain the geometry and angles, could help other crews achieve the same results. Hatcher said yes, sir. Said it was not complicated. Said any machine gunner who understood basic trajectory and ricochet could do it. Caldwell nodded, turned to Morrison, told him to have Hatcher demonstrate the technique to all machine gun crews in the battalion. Told him to do it today. Told him this technique might save hundreds of lives if it could be replicated. Then Caldwell looked at Hatcher again, said the Corps would not court-martial him, said instead the Corps would pretend this technique had always been part of doctrine, said official records would show nothing unusual happened on September 18th. Said unofficially, Hatcher had done something remarkable. Said the Marine Corps did not like remarkable unless it came from officers. Said Hatcher should keep his head down and not talk about this. Said most importantly, thank you. You saved lives today. Hatcher said, yes, sir. Said he was just trying to help. Said he did not want recognition. Just wanted to stop watching Marines die. Caldwell dismissed him. Hatcher and Kaczynski walked back to their position, sat down in their shell crater, both of them shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. Kaczynski said that was the craziest thing he had ever seen. Said he thought they were both going to prison. Said he could not believe it actually worked. Hatcher just nodded, chewed tobacco, looked at the ridgeline where 6 pillboxes had been destroyed, thought about Mitchell and Romano and Chen and O'Brien, thought about how many Marines were alive now because of geometry and physics and someone willing to break the rules. By the afternoon of September 18th, every machine gun crew in 2nd Battalion had received instruction on ricochet firing technique. Hatcher demonstrated personally to 8 crews. Other gunners spread the word to their units. By evening, 1st Battalion and 3rd Battalion were requesting demonstrations. The technique spread through the 1st Marine Division in less than 24 hours. Machine gunners who had been frustrated watching their fire accomplish nothing suddenly had a method that worked. Officers who had been ordering the same failed attacks suddenly had a tactical option that achieved results. On September 19th, machine gunners from 1st Battalion used ricochet firing to eliminate 9 pillboxes during an advance toward Bloody Nose Ridge. On September 20th, 3rd Battalion eliminated 13 positions using the same technique. Other regiments heard about it. 5th Marines requested instruction. 7th Marines sent observers to watch demonstrations. By September 22nd, the entire division knew about ricochet firing. By September 25th, other Marine divisions on Peleliu were using it. By October, units on other islands were incorporating the technique into their tactics. The official Marine Corps reaction was complicated. The technique worked. That was undeniable. Lives were being saved. Positions that were previously impregnable were falling to machine gun fire. Advances that had stalled were moving forward. But the technique violated doctrine, required expenditure of massive amounts of ammunition, required machine gunners to make independent tactical decisions without officer supervision, required accepting that sometimes the manual did not have answers. The Corps handled this by not handling it. No official training bulletins were issued. No doctrine was updated. No field manuals were revised. The technique simply spread through informal channels. Machine gunners taught other machine gunners. Squad leaders told their crews. Officers looked the other way. If anyone at division or corps level asked, the answer was always the same. Marines were using standard suppressive fire techniques adapted to Peleliu's unique terrain. Nothing unusual was happening, nothing that required investigation or documentation. Hatcher never received official recognition. No medals, no commendations, no mention in unit citations. His name does not appear in official after-action reports. The Corps made sure of that. But within the division, Hatcher became something of a legend. Machine gunners knew his name. Officers knew what he had done. Marines who had been part of Dog Company on September 18th told the story to new replacements. On October 3rd, a gunner from 1st Battalion named Corporal Michael DeLuca used ricochet firing to eliminate 4 pillboxes in 30 minutes. DeLuca's position was under heavy fire. Standard methods would have required calling for artillery or air support. Ricochet firing allowed DeLuca to handle the problem himself immediately. On October 7th, a gunner from 3rd Battalion named Private First Class Robert Sullivan destroyed 3 connected positions using ricochet firing. Sullivan's technique was so effective that Japanese soldiers abandoned 2 additional positions without fighting, fearing they would be hit by invisible fire they could not defend against. On October 12th, a gunner from 5th Marines named Sergeant William O'Donnell used ricochet firing to defend against a Japanese counterattack at night. O'Donnell could not see the attacking soldiers, could only hear them moving in the darkness. He fired ricochets off coral formations, bouncing rounds into areas where the sounds were coming from. The attack collapsed. 15 Japanese bodies were found the next morning in positions O'Donnell could never have hit with direct fire. Each of these Marines knew about Hatcher. Each had either watched his demonstration or learned the technique from someone who had. Each achieved results that would have been impossible using standard doctrine. By November, when organized Japanese resistance on Peleliu finally ended, Marine machine gunners had eliminated over 200 fortified positions using ricochet firing. Those 200 positions would have required frontal assaults by rifle squads and flamethrower teams. Standard casualty rates for such assaults were approximately 40%. Simple mathematics suggested ricochet firing had saved hundreds of Marines from death or wounds. But there were no statistics kept, no official analysis conducted, no after-action reports documenting the technique's effectiveness. The Marine Corps had decided this innovation never officially happened. Hatcher himself continued serving on Peleliu through November. Dog Company took heavy casualties. The fighting was brutal. Hatcher survived. Kozinski survived. Sergeant Daly was wounded on October 9th and evacuated. Lieutenant Morrison was killed on October 17th by a sniper. After Peleliu, Hatcher was sent back to Pavuvu for rest and refit. He spent 2 months there, never talked much about September 18th. Other Marines asked him about it. He would confirm the basic story, would explain the technique if asked. But he did not seek attention or recognition. In April 1945, Hatcher participated in the invasion of Okinawa. He operated a machine gun through 3 months of fighting, used ricochet firing when appropriate, used standard techniques when those worked better. He survived Okinawa. The war ended in August. Hatcher was discharged in November 1945. He went home to Dalton, Georgia, went back to work at the carpet mill, married a woman named Dorothy in 1947, had 3 children, lived a quiet life. He never talked much about the war. His family knew he had been a Marine, knew he had fought on Peleliu and Okinawa, knew he had operated a machine gun. They did not know about September 18, 1944, did not know about the ricochet firing technique, did not know he had saved hundreds of lives by breaking the rules. Raymond Hatcher died in May 1998 at the age of 76. His obituary in the Dalton Daily Citizen mentioned his service in the Marine Corps during World War II. It did not mention Peleliu specifically, did not mention machine guns, did not mention innovations or tactics or pillboxes. Most of his family attended the funeral, some of his co-workers from the carpet mill, a few Marines from the local VFW post, nobody from Marine Corps headquarters, nobody from military historians, nobody who knew about September 18, 1944. The Marine Corps never officially documented ricochet firing technique. It does not appear in any training manuals published during or after World War II. It is not taught at Marine Corps schools. It is not mentioned in official histories of the Peleliu campaign. But the technique did not disappear completely. Machine gunners continued using it in later conflicts when circumstances required. Korea saw some applications. Vietnam saw more. Modern machine gunners are aware that ricochets can be tactically useful, though doctrine still discourages deliberate ricochet firing except under specific conditions. At the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia, there is an exhibit on the Peleliu campaign. The exhibit includes photographs, maps, weapons, and personal items from Marines who fought there. It describes the brutal fighting, the high casualties, the eventual American victory. It mentions the difficulty of reducing Japanese fortifications. It does not mention ricochet firing, does not mention Raymond Hatcher. In the archives at Marine Corps History Division, there are after-action reports from 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, covering September 1944. These reports describe attacks on Japanese pillboxes, describe casualties taken, describe terrain difficulties. They do not describe unusual firing techniques. Do not mention that 6 pillboxes fell to 1 machine gun crew in 62 minutes on September 18th. The official story is that Marines on Peleliu overcame Japanese defenses through courage, firepower, and standard tactics. The unofficial story is more complicated. At the Peleliu battlefield today, now a Peleliu State Historical Site, you can walk the ground where Dog Company fought. You can see the coral ridges. You can see reconstructed Japanese pillboxes. You can stand where Hatcher set up his machine gun on September 18th and look at the terrain he fired across. If you know what you are looking for, you can see the geometry, can see the angles, can see how coral slopes would deflect bullets upward and backward, can understand immediately how the technique worked. But most visitors do not know what they are looking for. They see rocks and ridges and ruins. They do not see innovation, do not see a 22-year-old private from Georgia who decided doctrine was less important than results. That is how military innovation usually works. Not from the top down, not from manuals and schools and planning staffs, from individual soldiers facing problems that doctrine does not solve, from people willing to experiment when standard methods fail, from someone desperate enough or brave enough or crazy enough to try something different. Hatcher was not the only Marine who innovated on Peleliu. Other men figured out better ways to assault bunkers, clear caves, use flamethrowers, employ demolitions. Some of these innovations were documented, most were not. All of them involved breaking rules that were written by people who had never faced Peleliu's specific challenges. The difference between a good soldier and a great soldier is often the willingness to break rules when rules do not work. The difference between victory and defeat is sometimes whether your organization punishes that willingness or encourages it. The Marine Corps made the right choice on September 18, 1944. They chose to ignore violations of doctrine in favor of results. They chose to spread an effective technique instead of suppressing it. They chose to pretend nothing unusual happened, rather than punish innovation. But they also chose not to document it, chose not to study it, chose not to incorporate the lessons into future training, chose to let the innovation remain informal, personal, passed from Marine to Marine through word of mouth. Maybe that was the right choice too. Maybe some things cannot be taught through doctrine. Maybe some innovations only work when individuals figure them out for themselves under pressure. Maybe the best thing an organization can do is get out of the way and let its people solve problems. Raymond Hatcher went back to Dalton after the war, went back to the carpet mill, lived quietly, raised his family, never sought recognition, never wrote a memoir, never contacted historians, never tried to claim credit for anything. He died believing his actions on Peleliu were just what any Marine would have done in that situation, that the technique was obvious once you thought about it, that breaking doctrine was not remarkable when lives were at stake. He was wrong about that. What he did was remarkable. The technique was not obvious. Breaking doctrine required courage most people do not have, and the lives he saved numbered in the hundreds. But that is how the best soldiers usually think. They do not see themselves as heroes. They see themselves as people doing what needed to be done. They do not seek recognition. They seek results. They do not care about being remembered. They care about accomplishing the mission and bringing their people home alive. Somewhere in storage at the Marine Corps museums, there might be the actual machine gun Hatcher used on September 18th, Serial number records suggest a Browning M1917 from 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, was destroyed by sustained firing during the Peleliu campaign. No specific details about when or why, just a notation that the weapon was beyond repair and was scrapped. That might have been Hatcher's gun, might have been the weapon that fired 15,000 rounds in 62 minutes and destroyed 6 pillboxes. Might have been the gun that proved geometry and physics could defeat concrete and courage. Or it might not. Records from Peleliu are incomplete. Equipment was tracked poorly during intense combat. Weapons were damaged and replaced constantly. We will probably never know for certain. But somewhere on Peleliu, in the coral that has reclaimed the battlefields, there are probably still bullet impacts from September 18, 1944. Probably still marks where rounds hit at shallow angles and bounced upward. Probably still evidence of what Raymond Hatcher figured out that day. The coral does not remember. The island does not care. Time and weather and vegetation have covered most traces of the battle. But the technique remains. Lives were saved. Innovation happened. Rules were broken for good reasons. And somewhere in military history, even if not in official records, there is a story about a 22-year-old machine gunner from Georgia who figured out how to shoot an enemy he could not see.